All right, I'm Mike. Hey. It's been a while since, as a group, we've gone through the book of Genesis. Okay. Direct. It's been a while since we've gone through the book of Genesis. So I think enough time has passed. So what I'd like to do is take a look at Genesis chapter 1 tonight. Now, it's hard to think about Genesis chapter 1 without thinking about the whole debate between creation versus evolution. Was the earth created in 6 days, or did it develop over a long period of time? Did human beings evolve from other kinds of creatures, or were we created the way that we are? Even in like the literal Bible interpretation camp, you have young earth creationists and old earth creationists. But at the center of the controversy is this one chapter, Genesis chapter 1. I would like to propose something tonight that might seem a little bit heretical at first. I'd like to consider the possibility that Genesis chapter 1 was not written to describe or not written to describe or primarily to prove to us that God created the universe. Wait a second. Let me explain what I'm thinking. Okay. Back in the day when this chapter was written, there was no theory of evolution. There were no scientists. Everybody believed that God created the world. So the debate was not whether or not God created the world. The debate was which God created the world. As Christians, I think we become so entangled in this controversy that over creation versus evolution, or 6 literal days versus a long period of time, that we have neglected to look at the passage for what it's trying to say to us itself. We've treated this passage like it is a weapon to use against our opponents instead of what it was really meant to be, food to nourish ourselves. Now, it's not that we can't use this passage in a discussion about the origin of the universe. But if we only use it in this way, we fail to get anything out of it for ourselves. And that's what I think God intended for us to get from it. So tonight I'd like to talk about this passage, what it might have meant to the people who originally received it. What did it mean, and what was it meant to do for them as a people? And my hope is that if we understand this, maybe we will get something more out of it for ourselves. I'm going to read Genesis chapter 1, and it's a little bit long, so I'm going to read it out of an easier translation, the TNIV, if I can see. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was an evening and a morning, the first day. And then God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made a vault that separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. And God called the vault sky. And there was an evening and there was a morning, the second day. And then God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. And God called the dry ground land. And God gathered the waters, He called them sea. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in them, according to their various kinds." And so it was. And the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was an evening and a morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky that separate the day from the night. And let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light to the earth. And so it was. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser night to govern the night. And he also made the stars. And God set them in the vault of the sky to give light to the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was an evening and a morning, the 4th day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky, and so God created the creatures of the sea and every living thing that moves, that is in the with which the water teems, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, 'Be fruitful and multiply in numbers, and fill the water of the sea, and let the birds increase on the earth.' And there was an evening and a morning, the 5th day. And then God said, 'Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move on the ground, wild animals, each according to its kind.' And it was so. And God made wild animals according to their kinds, and livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move over the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, 'Let human beings be made in our image and in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over the creatures that move along the ground.' And so God created human beings in his image. In his image he created them, male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over everything, every creature that moves on the ground.' And then God said, 'I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree that has fruit in it. It'll be yours for food. And to all the beasts and the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move on the ground, and everything that has breath of life in it, I give them every green plant for food.' And God saw all that he had made, and it was good. And there was an evening, and there was a morning, the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work that he was doing. And on the 7th day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work that he had created and all that he had done." Okay. So Genesis belongs to a part of the Bible called the Pentateuch, or the Torah. These are the first 5 books of the Bible. They're written by Moses, and these are the foundational stories and teachings of the people of Israel. Now, the Israelites were people that had been in captivity for 200 years by the time Moses meets, by the time of Moses, they'd been in captivity for 200 years. And they knew that they had their own identity as a people. They had their own God. They had a promised land that they had heard of, that God was supposed to be giving to them. But this wasn't the reality that they were living right now. They were in captivity. They were slaves to a people who worshipped other gods. For about over 200 years, there wouldn't have been anybody left who had seen or could verify anything that they were told to believe about God. And so, what would you do if you had lived your whole life and hadn't seen anything that confirmed what you saw or what you were supposed to believe about God? How hard would it be to imagine? Or would you have to imagine that? Or is that what life is like? Would they have thought? They must have doubted They must have thought, maybe the gods of Egypt are stronger than the God of Israel. Or maybe God has forgotten us. Or maybe God's given up on us. So it's into this situation that Moses comes. And so Moses comes in and he says, I've been out in the wilderness and I've been talking to God. And God said he wants me to take you out of captivity and bring you into the promised land. Now naturally, if somebody came to you and said that if you followed them, that all of your spiritual hopes and aspirations would be filled, you'd be a little bit skeptical. And so before you go traipsing off into the wilderness with this guy, you'd want him to answer some questions. And your first question probably wouldn't be, well, is it 6 literal days? You would probably have a question more like, can I trust this God that you're talking about? Pharaoh is really powerful, and his gods must be powerful, or why else would we have been in captivity for so long? And even though we're slaves, we have food to eat, and we have a place to sleep. If we go off into the wilderness, what's going to happen to us? And finally, why? Why should we leave? I mean, the situation is bad now, but it wasn't that long ago that our ancestor Joseph was like really important person in Egypt. And things are bad now, but they could turn around. I mean, does this God have a purpose for us that is greater than anything that we could achieve here in Egypt? What the Israelites really want to know is God strong enough to rescue them from Pharaoh and his gods? Can he sustain them in the wilderness? Does he have a purpose for them that's even worth leaving for? These are the kind of questions that the Israelites would have asked Moses. And it just so happens that these are the questions that this chapter in Genesis answers. Back in the beginning when I said I wanted to propose something to you, that maybe this isn't primarily to prove to us that God created the universe, it's because of this. Everybody believed God existed. Proving that God created the universe isn't the point of this text. What is proving is, can I trust God? And it's God in competition, not with no God, but God in competition with other gods that people could believe in. And so, I'm going to look at these questions again, and we're going to talk a little bit about what other people might have believed at that time. So, can God rescue us from Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt? In ancient religions, in these other ancient religions, including the Egyptian one, before the gods could create the universe, they had to win a battle. They had to fight and defeat the gods, the monsters of chaos. There were these chaotic monsters that kept the universe in a state of disorder, and the gods would have to come in and defeat them to establish order. But the God of Genesis, this story says that at the very beginning of history, God is alone. There are no enemies to fight, no battles to win. He doesn't have to defeat anyone to create the universe. All he has to do is speak, and the universe comes into existence. Another interesting thing is that all of these gods that people worship, if you look at the days of creation, these are things that God creates. God creates the earth and the sky. God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the things that people worshipped. And so, if you look at Pharaoh and his gods and say, is our God powerful enough to rescue us from Pharaoh and his gods? The answer is yes, because everything that exists because of God. He is the source of everything. Well, will God provide for us in the wilderness? This isn't primarily just a question about whether God is capable or powerful enough to provide, but does he care enough? If you look at this chapter, you see 6 days of creation. If you split them in half and put them into 2 columns, you see that the first 3 days perfectly line up with the second 3 days. On the first day, God separates light from darkness, and on the fourth day, He creates the sun to rule the day, and He creates the moon to rule the night. On the second day, He separates the sea from the sky. And on the 5th day, He creates the birds that live in the air and the fish that swim in the water. And on the 3rd day, when He separates the land from the water, He creates, that's on the 3rd day. On the 6th day, He creates the creatures that live on the land, including human beings. And what we see from this is that before God creates His creatures, first He creates a home for them. He creates a place for them to live. And it says, too, that He creates food, and He assigns food for each of the creatures. So He gives all the creatures something to eat and a place to live. And so, this question, does God care enough to sustain us in the wilderness? The answer is yes. He provides for His creatures a place for them to live and food for them to eat. But does God have something better in store for us than what we can achieve in Egypt? In all the other religions in the ancient Near East, human beings were not really that significant. One story says that the reason why there was a flood is because the gods were annoyed because people were so noisy, and they just wanted to wipe them out. And that's why there was this great flood. And they talk about human beings kind of like they're an accident in some of the stories, where the gods are fighting this battle with these monsters, and some blood spills on the ground, and out of the drops of the blood, human beings spring out. But even in the situation where it talks about us being created on purpose, it's not much better for us. Because in those stories, it's because the gods don't want to work. They create human beings to be their slaves. But in Genesis, the story it tells about what God intended for us is a lot different. I mean, there's no other religion in the ancient Near East that has human beings in this place. If you take the 6 days of creation out of the 2 columns and put them back in a straight line again, you see this progression from the lowest to the highest. That everything that comes later, the things that were created before were created for them. So you have the habitats, and the food is created for the animals, and human beings. It says they're created last. It says all these things were given to them to rule over and have dominion over. And TJ, she pointed out to me that the very last creation was woman. So, yes, she also told me to point it out. That is dominion. Benevolent rule. So, but the other thing too is it says that we're created in God's image. Now, in the ancient world, a king had images, like they had statues made of them, and when a statue was placed in a province of the king or emperor, that statue was given the same reverence that the king himself would have. Or if there was a seal on a ring was given to an administrator or somebody, then if that person stamped something, that thing that they wrote had the same authority that the king had. And so what this is saying is that human beings are given this tremendous authority. They're given God's authority in this world, to be His presence in this world. And that is a significant place that God has given us. And so, when the Israelites would have this question about, does God have something significant in store for us? Yes, He does. I think that this story would definitely have inspired the Israelites to have the confidence to follow Moses out into the wilderness. But it has a broader general spiritual significance for us as well. Because all of us, we're captives in our life, of sin before we came to follow Jesus. And this says that, yes, God is powerful enough to rescue you from your past. And God is faithful to provide for you in the present and to take care of you. And that there is a purpose in the future, a purpose that God has, this isn't just pointless, our walking with Jesus. But not just a broad general thing. It can also apply to, our situation in particular. If we're facing a difficult time. Sometimes things happen and we don't know what the future has in store for us. Was just announced recently that our contract, the company that I work for, is expiring, and so I'm putting out lots of job applications, or hoping that there's another place in the company that's going to open up that that I can move into, and that's scary. I don't know what the future holds. But if I look at this, I should believe that God is powerful enough to rescue me from this situation, and that He's faithful enough to take care of me in the present, and that He has a purpose. And so I'm just going to pray, and we have communion over there. If you're a believer, you are welcome to take that. If you're not, then find somebody to pray with or something. Okay, let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for your faithfulness, for your love, and for the great purpose that you have for us. Lord, I just ask that you would just make that like a reality in our minds and our hearts, and help us to live like we really, really trust in that. Amen.